It was supposed to be a simple, fun day at the neighborhood pool. The sun was high, the air warm, and Emma, my 4-year-old, was excited to finally take a dip. We had just moved into this quiet community, and everything seemed perfect until she showed up. Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. She was standing by the edge of the pool, arms crossed, eyes scanning the area like she owned the place. Emma ran up to me, splashing in the shallow end, her laughter ringing out like music. I was relieved to see her so happy. But Karen's presence in the corner of my eye sent an uneasy shiver down my spine. She'd always had a way of showing up just when things were going too smoothly. Then it happened, without warning. Emma had taken a step too close to the deep end, her small body teetering on the edge. I was about to reach out to pull her back when Karen, with no regard for the child's safety, shoved her into the pool. It was quick, like a slap to the face. One moment, Emma was there. The next, she was splashing and choking in the water, her tiny arms flailing in panic. "Karen!" I screamed, rushing forward, my heart dropping into my stomach. But Karen didn't even flinch. She stood there, watching Emma struggle in the water, a cold, satisfied smile tugging at the corners of her lips. I dove into the pool without thinking, pulling Emma into my arms. But as I looked back up at Karen, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just a neighborly dispute anymore. This was war. The day we moved into the neighborhood, I had high hopes for our new life. Emma was just a toddler then, full of energy and wonder. We had traded the noise and chaos of city living for the quiet, tree-lined streets of this seemingly perfect suburban community. The house was cozy, the neighbors friendly, and for the most part, it seemed like everything I had ever dreamed of. But then came Karen. At first, I thought she was just another well-meaning neighbor, someone who took pride in her role as the HOA president. She gave me a pamphlet on the community rules when we first moved in, pointing out all the do's and don'ts of living here. No lawn ornaments larger than 18 inches, no trash bins visible from the street, and of course, the endless list of regulations about the swimming pool. I smiled politely, nodded, and tried to keep up with her overwhelming enthusiasm. After all, I didn't want to rock the boat, not with a young child in a new town. But Karen's obsession with the rules went beyond ordinary community standards. It felt personal. She seemed to have a hand in every little detail of the neighborhood, and if something wasn't up to her standards, she made sure everyone knew. The first time I saw her true nature was when I was out in my yard, raking the leaves one chilly afternoon. Karen strolled over with that forced smile of hers and started in on me about the tree in my front yard, how its branches were too close to the sidewalk, how I needed to trim it to meet the HOA's aesthetic guidelines. I didn't argue. I simply nodded, said I'd take care of it, and went back to work. But it didn't end there. Every time she passed by, there was always something. My mailbox wasn't the right color. The hedge near the garage was slightly too tall. It felt like I couldn't breathe without Karen finding fault. I was starting to realize that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for her. Emma was just starting preschool at the time, and I found myself spending more time at home, trying to make sure our little corner of the neighborhood stayed peaceful. That meant keeping my head down, making sure my lawn was perfect, making sure no one could accuse us of violating the rules. But that day at the pool was different. That was the day everything changed. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind of day that felt like summer was just around the corner, the sky clear and the sun shining brightly. Emma had been asking me all week if we could go to the neighborhood pool, and I thought, why not? It was a community gathering spot. The kids were all there playing and splashing in the shallow end, and I thought it would be a nice way for us to bond, for Emma to meet new friends. We arrived at the pool just after lunch, and I immediately noticed Karen standing by the water, her usual icy smile in place. She had always been polite but distant with me, and that afternoon was no different. She nodded curtly when I greeted her, but there was an underlying tension I couldn't shake. I wasn't sure if it was just me or if it was the way Karen carried herself, always watching, always judging. As Emma happily splashed around in the shallow end, I felt a growing sense of unease in the pit of my stomach. Karen was there, lurking on the sidelines, her eyes constantly flicking from me to my daughter, as if waiting for something. It wasn't until Emma had wandered a little too close to the deeper side of the pool that I realized Karen was planning something. I wasn't sure if it was jealousy, control, or something darker, but Karen had a way of making everything about her. Watching Emma, laughing with the other kids, carefree, it bothered her. I saw the look in Karen's eyes, calculating, cold. I called Emma back, but it was too late. In one swift motion, Karen stepped forward and with an unnatural, forceful shove, sent my 4-year-old daughter flying into the deep end of the pool. The sight of my baby tumbling through the air, her arms flailing in panic, is something I'll never forget. Tom seemed to slow down. I couldn't process what had just happened. Karen stood there, arms folded, watching as my daughter struggled to keep her head above water. Emma was screaming, her tiny voice cracking with fear. And Karen? She was smirking. I didn't think. I just reacted. I rushed to the poolside, diving in without hesitation, and pulled Emma out of the water. Her little body was limp, cold, and drenched. I held her tightly, my heart pounding in my chest, terrified that something worse had happened. "Mommy, help!" Emma cried, still trembling from the shock. "Don't worry, baby, you're safe now," I whispered, kissing the top of her wet head. I looked up at Karen, my rage bubbling to the surface. Her expression hadn't changed. She didn't apologize. She didn't even move to help. Instead, she stood there, watching as if it were no big deal. "Karen," I shouted, my voice shaking with fury. "What the hell is wrong with you?" But she didn't flinch. She simply looked at me, almost bored. "It's just a pool, calm down. She's fine." I couldn't believe it. She had no remorse, no guilt. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just a neighborly dispute anymore. This was something much bigger. And whatever Karen thought she could get away with, it was time for her to understand that I wasn't someone she could push around. The pool water still clung to my skin as I held Emma tightly in my arms, her small body trembling against mine. I tried to steady my breathing, fighting back the overwhelming flood of panic that surged through me. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat reminding me of how close I had come to losing my daughter. But Karen, standing on the edge of the pool, showed no remorse, no sign of concern for what had just happened. She stood there, arms crossed, watching me like I was the one making a scene. "Karen," I screamed again, my voice raw with frustration. "What is wrong with you? She's 4 years old. You just threw her in the pool." She lifted an eyebrow, her smile never wavering. "She's fine. You're overreacting," she said casually, like she was discussing the weather. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Overreacting? I could barely process what she had just done, let alone her complete lack of empathy. She had shoved my baby into a pool with no warning, no reason, and now she was standing there dismissing the whole thing as if it were a minor inconvenience. I wanted to march over to her, to grab her by the arm and shake her, but I couldn't leave Emma alone. I couldn't even focus on the woman who had done this. I needed to make sure my daughter was okay. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emma whispered, her little voice filled with fear. Her wide eyes stared up at me, and I could feel the weight of her terror pressing on my chest. "Sweetheart, it's okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though my hands were shaking as I wiped the water from her face. "You're okay, I've got you." But even as I comforted her, the rage inside me grew. This wasn't just about the pool. This was about Karen's complete disregard for the safety and well-being of others. It was about the power she had been allowed to wield over this neighborhood, unchecked for far too long. "Karen," I said, my voice trembling with anger, "you could have drowned her. She's just a baby, and you—" I stopped myself, trying to regain my composure. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to hurt people and just walk away." But Karen's response was colder than I could have imagined. "She's fine. She'll get over it. Kids bounce back quickly. You're making this a bigger deal than it is." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if she were talking about a minor inconvenience, a spilled drink or a scraped knee. She wasn't acknowledging the trauma that had just happened. She wasn't even sorry. Emma clung to me tighter, her tiny arms wrapped around my neck. "Mommy, I don't want to go back in the water," she whispered, her body still shivering from the cold, both from the pool and from fear. "Of course, you don't have to, sweetheart," I said, holding her close. My eyes never left Karen, and I could feel my anger building. How dare she? How dare she throw my daughter into the pool and then act like nothing had happened? I'm calling the police, I said, my voice hardening. What you did was reckless, dangerous, and I'm not letting you get away with it. Karen raised her hands in mock surrender, a smirk playing at the corners of her lips. Go ahead. It's just a pool. But I'm sure the police will have better things to do than listen to you complain about a little splash. Her words stung, but I wasn't backing down. You don't get to do this, I said firmly. You will be held accountable. Karen's expression faltered for a brief moment, but it was quickly replaced by her usual coldness. She glanced over at the other neighbors lounging by the pool, who were now watching the scene unfold. Some seemed uncomfortable, others downright hostile, but not one of them stepped in to help. Not one of them said anything. It was clear. Karen had made herself untouchable. She had created this toxic environment where people were too afraid to speak up, too afraid to stand against her. But today I wasn't afraid. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my fingers trembling as I held Emma close, the phone pressed to my ear. The operator answered quickly, and I explained the situation, doing my best to remain calm as I told her about the assault, the complete lack of care, and the danger Karen had put my daughter in. The operator assured me they would send someone immediately. While I waited, Karen stood there, her expression unbothered, almost amused. She knew exactly what she was doing, twisting the situation, using her power to control and intimidate. But I wasn't going to let her win. As I stood there, holding my daughter, watching the other neighbors shuffle uncomfortably, I realized just how much this had escalated. This wasn't just about a pool. It was about everything Karen had done to this community. It was about her bullying, her reign of fear. She wasn't just a neighbor I had to tolerate. She was a threat to everything I held dear. And I was done being silent. The police arrived quickly, as I had expected, but Karen was unfazed. She didn't even bat an eye as the officers approached, her smug smile still firmly in place. It was like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just thrown a 4-year-old child into a pool with no warning, no care. One of the officers, a young man with a stern expression, stepped toward me first. Ma'am, what seems to be the problem here? I looked at Karen, my eyes blazing with anger, then back at the officer. This woman, I said, my voice trembling with both fear and fury, threw my daughter into the pool. She's 4 years old, and she's terrified. Karen scoffed, crossing her arms as she tilted her chin up. I didn't throw her. I just gave her a little push. She's fine. Look at her. She's overreacting. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The officer raised an eyebrow at Karen, but didn't say anything at first. His focus was on me, his eyes softening. Ma'am, I understand this must be upsetting, but we need to make sure your child is okay. Can you tell us what happened? I nodded, trying to keep my composure for Emma's sake. We were at the pool, just like everyone else. Emma was playing in the shallow end, and without any warning, Karen pushed her into the deep end. She didn't even care. I saw her struggling, and I had to jump in to pull her out. Emma, still clinging to me, looked up at the officer with wide, terrified eyes. I didn't want to go in the deep water, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I couldn't hold back my frustration any longer. She was terrified. She didn't even know how to swim. And Karen didn't care. She's done this before in other situations, and I'm not going to let her get away with it again. The officer nodded, acknowledging the seriousness of the situation. We'll need to take a statement, ma'am, and we'll also be looking into the circumstances. This is a serious matter, especially when it involves a child. As the officers continued to question me, Karen's arrogance grew. She stood there, arms crossed, eyeing the scene as though she were watching a performance. This is ridiculous. I did nothing wrong. She's just making a big deal out of nothing, Karen muttered under her breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. Karen, you've gone too far. I shot back, my voice rising. You've harassed me. You've tried to control everything in this neighborhood. But this is crossing a line, and you'll answer for it. The officer glanced at Karen again, his tone sharp. Ma'am, you need to calm down and step aside. Let us handle this. We'll be reviewing the footage from the pool's cameras and taking statements from the witnesses. You've put yourself in a very difficult position. As Karen's expression tightened, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place, I realized just how much she had underestimated me. She had thought she could just get away with anything, with no consequences. But this time it wasn't just about me. It was about all the people she had bullied, intimidated, and made feel small over the years. The neighborhood had finally had enough, and I was leading the charge. The investigation took a few days, but it was clear Karen's version of the events didn't hold up. Witnesses came forward confirming my story. The pool's security footage, which Karen had been so careful to ignore, showed her walking up to Emma and shoving her into the water without warning. It was chilling to watch, especially knowing Emma had been so helpless in that moment. In the meantime, Karen attempted to defend herself by making the situation sound trivial, claiming she was just playing around with the kids, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. But as the investigation progressed, more of her behavior came to light. Neighbors, who had previously been silent, began sharing their stories of Karen's overbearing nature. People who had been intimidated into submission came forward, recounting their experiences with her reign of terror in the HOA. The final straw came when another neighbor, someone I'd only casually spoken to before, revealed a conversation she'd overheard between Karen and a friend of hers. In the conversation, Karen had casually admitted to teaching kids a lesson by forcing them to confront their fears, as though it were some sort of twisted discipline. She didn't see the harm in her actions. It became clear to me now that this wasn't an isolated incident. This was Karen's pattern of behavior, using her authority to make people, especially children, feel weak and small, all while hiding behind her position. It made my blood boil. She had done this with Emma. She had done this to countless others. But now, Karen was about to face the consequences of her actions. The moment of revelation came swiftly, like the final pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. Once Karen's actions were fully uncovered, the fallout was inevitable. I had known from the beginning that her reign of terror wasn't just about a single pool incident. It was about years of control, manipulation, and cruelty that had been quietly tolerated by the neighborhood. But now, everything was about to unravel. The story began to spread like wildfire. The news outlet picked up the story, and what followed was a flood of former neighbors, community members, and even past HOA victims who had suffered under Karen's cruel tactics. They were ready to speak out, ready to finally expose the woman who had wielded her HOA position like a weapon. I had no idea how many people Karen had hurt until they came forward. It turned out that Karen had been using her HOA presidency to enforce rules with an iron fist, all the while manipulating neighbors into complying with her every whim. She would fine families for the smallest infractions, create divisions in the community, and systematically drive out anyone who dared challenge her. The fact that she had gotten away with it for so long was mind-boggling. But now, the walls were coming down. A former resident of the neighborhood, Michelle, who had moved away years ago, reached out to me. She had heard about the incident and told me she had experienced firsthand the torment Karen could dish out. I was one of the first to leave because of her, Michelle said, her voice trembling over the phone. She made my family feel like we didn't belong. It started with small things, an overgrown bush, a misplaced trash can, and then it escalated to threats of fines, threats of legal action. In the end, we had no choice but to sell and leave. It turned out Karen's cruelty wasn't limited to children. Her whole philosophy was about dominance. She used her position to isolate families, divide neighbors, and break them down emotionally. And all of it had been done in the name of community improvement. The more I learned, the more I felt sickened. Karen had used her former law enforcement connections to manipulate situations to her advantage. She had access to local legal resources, which she used to intimidate anyone who didn't comply with her demands. Karen didn't just have power in the neighborhood. She had connections to back her up, and that made her even more dangerous. But the tipping point came when I uncovered a hidden truth about Karen's past. She had been involved in a covert investigation years ago, one that had been swept under the rug, much like her exit from law enforcement. I couldn't believe it at first. How had this woman, who had done so much harm, escaped accountability all these years? The answer was simple. No one had dared to challenge her until now. I called my lawyer, a woman named Diane who had been my rock through this whole ordeal. Diane was as furious as I was when I told her what I had uncovered. "This changes everything," she said. "If Karen used her position to intimidate and manipulate, we've got the leverage we need to bring her down." With this new information, we went to the local authorities. Armed with proof of Karen's manipulation, her hidden connections, and her abuse of power, we filed an official complaint against her. We also pressed charges for child endangerment, as her actions that day had gone far beyond simple bullying. They had put Emma's life in danger. The community, once divided, rallied together. More neighbors came forward, some in tears, others with anger. They finally had the courage to speak out. They no longer feared Karen. They had seen the truth. Karen's arrogance crumbled when the evidence was laid bare. Her so-called clean record from her law enforcement days was full of discrepancies, and the power she had once used to control everyone began to turn against her. She was no longer the unchallenged ruler of the neighborhood. She was just another person facing the consequences of her actions. The story took an even more dramatic turn when Karen attempted to retaliate. She tried to dismiss the accusations as a personal vendetta, claiming that I was simply seeking revenge for a small misunderstanding. But as the community stood behind me, Karen's facade cracked. The truth was too overwhelming, and the support from the neighbors gave me the strength to keep pushing forward. Karen was eventually stripped of her position as HOA president. The police investigated her previous actions, and the legal system began to hold her accountable for her decades of manipulation. The community voted in a new HOA board, one that was fair, kind, and ready to rebuild what Karen had torn apart. For me, this wasn't just about taking Karen down. It was about showing my daughter, Emma, what it meant to stand up for what's right. To not let anyone, no matter how powerful they seemed, take away your peace or your dignity. Emma had seen it all. She had seen the rage, the fear, and the injustice, but she had also seen me fight for her and for everyone else in the neighborhood. In the end, I realized something important. Karen's cruelty had been a test of our strength, of our community, and of our resolve. We had passed that test together. The days following Karen's removal from the HOA presidency were strangely calm, but the peace that settled over the neighborhood felt earned. The community that had been fractured by her manipulations slowly began to come together again. People smiled at each other, waved when they passed on the street, and, most importantly, they no longer looked over their shoulders in fear of Karen's wrath. It was a new beginning for all of us, and the change was palpable. The ripple effects of her downfall were felt in every corner of the neighborhood. The atmosphere that had once been oppressive was now light and full of possibilities. People who had kept to themselves came out of their homes, exchanging friendly words and beginning to rebuild the connections that Karen had torn apart. As for Karen, the legal consequences continued to unfold. The charges against her were serious: child endangerment, abuse of power, and manipulation. I watched as her life slowly unraveled, piece by piece, her arrogance turning into desperation. The woman who had once controlled everything was now facing the full force of accountability. But even as I saw Karen struggle, I knew I had to focus on the most important part of all this: my family. I had stood up for Emma, and I'd stood up for the neighborhood, but now it was time to rebuild what had been broken in our own lives. I took Emma to the park one evening, the sun setting in a glorious wash of orange and pink. She ran ahead, chasing after the falling leaves, her laughter echoing through the air. Watching her, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. She was free again, free from fear, free from the shadow of Karen's control. "Mommy, look," Emma called, holding up a leaf as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "It's the biggest one ever." I smiled, my heart swelling with love. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." Emma dropped the leaf and ran back to me, throwing her arms around me with a hug that felt like it could heal the world. "I'm glad Karen is gone. I'm not scared anymore." Her words hit me like a wave of relief. For months, Emma had been living with the fear that Karen could ruin everything at a moment's notice. But now, she was free, free from the torment, free from the constant stress that had filled the air. I felt that same freedom wash over me. I had fought for Emma, for our family, and for the peace of mind that Karen had taken from us. But now it was back, and it was stronger than ever. Over the next few weeks, things continued to improve. The new HOA board quickly worked to create a fairer, more transparent system, one that actually cared about the needs of the community. They reinstated a sense of fairness, a sense of unity, that Karen had completely destroyed. It felt good to see neighbors working together again, putting the past behind them and focusing on building a better future. I received several messages from neighbors who thanked me for taking a stand against Karen. They apologized for not speaking up sooner, but I assured them there was no need for apologies. We had all been afraid at one point, but fear no longer held us back. We had all played a part in making things right, and together, we had shown Karen that her reign was over. But the most rewarding part was seeing Emma flourish. She became more confident, more trusting, and her smile grew brighter with each passing day. I knew that I had protected her, not just from Karen, but from a fear that had held her captive for so long. As the holiday season approached, the neighborhood threw a gathering at the park. It was a celebration of the newfound peace and unity. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter, children playing, and neighbors chatting. Emma ran up to me, holding a small Christmas ornament she had made at school. "Look, Mommy, I made this for you," she beamed, her face radiant with pride. "It's a present for you." I took the ornament in my hands, touched by the gesture. "It's beautiful, Emma. Thank you." She hugged me again, this time holding on to me like I was the one who was her world. And in that moment, I knew that everything I had done was worth it. For her safety, for her happiness, for our future. Karen may have thrown my daughter into a pool, but what came next was something she couldn't have foreseen. A community coming together, a mother fighting for her child, and a sense of justice that was long overdue. What she failed to realize was that she had created an unstoppable force by pushing us to our limits. We had fought back, and we had won. As the stars twinkled in the sky above, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The storm had passed, and for the first time in a long while, I knew that Emma and I were safe. Together, we had faced down the darkness and come out stronger on the other side.